On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, we find ourselves in New Mexico at a eulogical dig for a Native American tribe with Jessica and Seth. And of course, there's murder, mystery, and plot holes galore. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I watch every single episode of the hit 80s/90s show Murder, She Wrote, starring 3-time Academy Award nominee and 5-time Tony Award winner Miss Angela Lansbury. Today I'm going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 11, Murder Digs Deep, air date December 29th, 1985. As always, if you're new to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, I spoil everything there's to spoil about the episode, the murderer, the suspects, everything in between. You cannot do a Murder, She Wrote podcast without doing that, folks. So, this episode just recently aired on Hallmark Channel Mystery and Movies. So if you've seen it recently, sit back, relax, and enjoy, and let's see if we notice the same things. If you have not, you can see the episode for free on NBC's Peacock app, or on IMDb TV app, which are both on the Fire Stick and the Roku TV. Or if you own the DVDs like I do, get out disc 3, and this is the 3rd episode on that disc. Because there's going to be spoilers. Here we go. Happy Mother's Day, everybody. I hope everybody had a wonderful Mother's Day. I hope everything is going well for everyone out there. We are slowly getting back to normal. I got my vaccine, my second shot, and there were no symptoms with the first shot. There was no symptoms with the second shot, so I am doing fantastic, and I hope everybody else is too. This episode, honestly, is not as good as the last episode I watched, which was Sticks and Stones, set in Cabot Cove, and the last appearance of Harry Pierce. And it had a lot of plot holes, but let's get into it and I'll explain. So, we start off this episode in what appears to be Egypt, but it's actually a museum of some sort. A person is coming in on a thick rope, and they are coming in to steal some Native American artifacts. We don't know exactly who this is and what's going on until much later in the episode. We cut to Jessica in a car, driving with a man in New Mexico. The man's name is Raymond Two Crows. Yes, I swear that's his real name in the episode. And they are going to a dig site that is being funded by Mr. Armstrong. They stop and there are guards, and the guards let them in. The guard says, "I have a Raymond Two Crows with me and a Mrs. Jessica Fletcher," and they're allowed to go on through. And when she arrives, Seth is there. Yes, Seth Hazlitt, the local town doctor from Cabot Cove. This is one giant plot hole in the episode because we have no idea why Seth is there. There's a clear motivation as to why Jessica's there is to do research for her book that she's writing called Murder Digs Deep, hence the title of the episode. But it makes absolutely no sense for Seth to be there. He's a doctor. He's not a scientist of any kind, so I honestly don't understand why he's there. No explanation is given, and we're just, getting to know his character. His character was first introduced not that long ago in the episode Joshua Peabody Died Here, possibly, and he was in the previous episode Sticks and Stones, but he was very ornery in that episode. In this episode, he seems to take everything that Jessica says at face value and just goes along with everything that she says or does. So Seth is like, "I can't believe when I told you to come out here so you can do research for your book that you'd actually take me up on it." And she was like, "Well, I couldn't resist. You know me. I had to see the whole operation for myself." So we then get started meeting people. We first have Karen and Steve, 2 university students. They are sort of star-crossed lovers, meaning they're on again, off again, constantly yelling at each other, at each other's throat, being mean, that sort of thing. I hate you, you hate me, let's kiss and make up type situation. We then get introduced to Dr. Aubrey Benton, who's very full of himself. He's supposed to be a renowned doctor, and he has a degree in several areas. The goal of this exposition, of this dig, is to find evidence of an ancient Native American tribe that once was on the land where they're digging, allegedly. It is funded by Mr. Armstrong, played by Robert Vernon from The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and The Towering Inferno. Great actor. Fantastic actor. Unfortunately, he does not get much to do in this episode, which is really sad. And then we round out our cast with Dr. Garfield. Yes, that is his actual name, who is from the university, and Steve and Karen are his students. And Mr. Armstrong is very tight-lipped about his business dealings, sends Mrs. Armstrong outside in the scorching heat because it's very hot in New Mexico, I hear. And as far as I know, this was not filmed on location in Mexico. I would assume the way that the set looks, we are probably on the Universal backlot somewhere. Or on a studio lot made to look like we're in the desert. It's quite possible. So we get introduced to everybody, and as you can tell, there's not a lot of characters that we deal with in this particular episode. And Seth says, "So Jessica, what do you think of everyone so far?" And she's like, "I have enough characters to make a trilogy." No, you don't, but okay. So they have dinner later that night, and suddenly a Native American seems to appear at the top of the mountain and is chanting. And Seth says, "Oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to tell you, this happens every night." Really, Seth? You completely forgot? I mean, that slipped your mind that there was a guy that got up on the mountain and chanted? They believe it's Raymond Two Crows, but they can't prove it, because he seems to be the only one missing. It's a weekday, but the weekend is coming up, and the next day there's a bunch of extras that are digging, and Jessica's in the trenches as well. She ends up finding a gold artifact, and Mr. Armstrong is quite happy. He says that they have been doing this for 2 months and have found nothing but little pottery, that they used to use, with painted stuff on it, basically proving that yes, there were Native Americans there all those years ago. So when Jessica finds this, everyone is quite happy that she has found this piece. And Mr. Armstrong is very happy because it proves that there's gold on the premises. So he is constantly calling the lawyer in Santa Fe who owns the land and wants to buy it. But the lawyer is kind of budging on it and won't let him buy it right away. Dr. Aubrey Benton desperately wants the press to come, and Gideon Armstrong does not want that. And Raymond Two Crows randomly comes in. Seth talks to him while they're digging before Jessica finds the piece of gold, which is apparently a prayer stick or something they used to use. I'm not entirely sure. And he says, "Were you by any chance last night on top of the mountain chanting to us?" And he just walks away. Well, he randomly walks into the tent and says, "I agree, Mr. Armstrong. You people have been trying to trample the land of my ancestors for years. And then Mr. Armstrong has a little bit of dialogue that would never be said today, and this episode would not be done today. Says your ancestors was evicted from this land years ago, and it's no longer your land. It's owned by a lawyer in Santa Fe, and you have no rights to it whatsoever. So later that night, it's time for dinner again. Seth and Jessica pass by Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong's camper. Their camper and Mr. Benton's camper are the only two that have air conditioning. Everybody else has to rough it in tents with no air conditioning. I feel for you. I feel for them. So, it's dinner time, and they pass Mrs. Armstrong's cabin. Her name is Cynthia Armstrong, and she seems to be taking some mud or something off of her shoes, and she says she'll be to dinner in a moment. They go, and sure enough, the Native American appears at the top of the mountain and begins his chanting. Mrs. Armstrong asks the two cops that are sitting there with a bunch of guns sitting on the table, "Can't you do something? Can't you make him go away?" And he says no, he's actually not doing anything illegal. And so she says, "Well, I'll do something." She picks up a gun that is sitting nearby and decides to fire shots at him. He falls over the side, and it appears that he's dead. They all run up to the mountain. Even though it's dark, they're able to find exactly where he is. Another plot hole. And when they turn him over, it's Raymond Two Crows. He is dead. But Mrs. Fletcher's not so sure he died from the fall or the gunshot wound, because his costume is thrown somewhere else completely. It makes absolutely no sense to her or the audience. And so they take his body and put it in the camper. Mr. Armstrong has a tent meeting and basically tells everybody that for anyone who wants to stay, he will give them double the money that he was going to pay them at the end of the dig, and that he will call the police to have them take Mr. Raymond's body away and go from there. But that night, when Dr. Aubrey Benton is about to call the police, Mr. Armstrong says they're not calling the police. He says, "I'm not going to let them trample this place before we find the treasure, the gold." And Dr. Benton is like, "It's not about the gold. We're not trying to find any gold. We're trying to find genuine Native American artifacts to prove that somebody else was here and that their life had meaning." He said, "Yeah, well, that might be what you're looking for. But do you want them trampling all over it before we can find anything of value?" And he says, "I guess not." And then he disables the radio so that no one can call out for help. The next day, Mrs. Fletcher stands up top the mountain. And suddenly she says, "Seth, are you watching me?" And he says, "Yes." And suddenly she falls backwards and screams. I tried to get this in a screenshot, but I couldn't. It happens way too fast, but it's hilarious. So instead, your visual aid is Jessica standing up on the mountain talking to Seth. She then says, "Was that convincing?" And he goes, "Dear God, woman, why are you always doing this to me?" He said, "Yes, it sure looked real." He said, "Well, I think that's what Raymond Two Crows did last night. Or maybe it wasn't him at all." She says, looking down on this, he says, she said, "Why didn't the body fall forward, not backwards?" She was like, "This whole setup looks really weird." She says, "You need to go take another look at the body." She goes to talk to Dr. Benton. He says that they decide to go. She says, "I bet you the cops weren't called. Let's go into town." they find that the vehicles are disabled, and the only person who has the key is Mr. Armstrong. So she goes and she says, "Do you realize that there are kidnapping laws even in New Mexico?" And he says, "You're not a prisoner. You're free to leave whenever you go, but you won't do it in one of my vehicles." And she said, "Why are you holding us hostage?" And she said, "Did you call the cops?" And he does not admit whether he did or not. And Dr. Benton basically says that they did, and that they're taking a while to show up for some reason, which is a dumb, flimsy excuse. But whatever. And he says, "And besides, if you're thinking that I killed him, I was in my cabin with Dr. Benton at the time." And Dr. Benton sort of seems shocked and doesn't know what to say. And, he goes, "Yeah, sure, right." So then they talk outside of Dr. Benton's cabin, and she says, "You were kind of surprised when he said you were in his cabin all night." And he said, "Well, I wasn't. I was in my own cabin, going over notes for our book. Remember, I want you to write my autobiography." "Oh, yes, of course, our book," she says very casually. And so then Seth comes to her after she talks to Benton, after he gives her like a bunch of press clippings to get to know him a little better. Yeah, he's very full of himself. And Seth comes over and he says, "You were right. I took a look at the other body. I'm sorry. Sorry. I took a look at another of Raymond Two Crow's body, and you're right. He did not die by a gunshot wound. He did not die from a fall from the rocks. Raymond Two Crows died by drowning." Dun dun dun. They're in the middle of the desert. How is that possible? So they decide to go through Raymond's belongings and find out that he's not Native American at all. He is Raymond. He is not Raymond Two Crows. He's Raymond. I don't even know his last name. It doesn't even matter. And he has a lot of books on Native American culture to try to basically pass himself off as Native American, which he is not. Which is, again, something that would never be done on television today. Someone pretending to be Native American. It just would not happen. So, honestly, interesting moment there. So, after this, they go to Mrs. Armstrong's camper, and they say, she says, "Why is he doing this?" And she says, "He's a very powerful man, Mrs. Fletcher. He always gets his way one way or another." And she basically, Jessica says, "He didn't call for help, did he? The police are not coming." She said, "Now you're catching on. He disabled the radio. We can't even call out for help. The only time he puts it in is to call his lawyer, Mr. Parks, who owns this land. He's wanting to buy it from him, just so he can exploit whatever's here." Mrs. Fletcher then looks over the plans of the regular site and decides to see if there's any water nearby. She said they would have to have had water to live here for several years, the ancient Native American culture that was there all them years ago. So she goes, and Seth follows her, and then he loses her. And then we hear the chanting again, and everything seems to be really spooky, and then Jessica comes out again, and she scares Seth, and she's like, "Oh my goodness." This is she comes out with a boombox and says, "Well, look, Seth, this is our ghost." So they hear dripping and they decide to follow it, and they find themselves in a stream where the river culminates. And also they find boxes from the university with the university name, University of Utah, on it. And they realize that the artifacts that they've been digging up, because Karen found something earlier, and she has or actually that comes a little bit later, hold on. They find that all the artifacts that they've been digging up has been stolen from the Native American exhibit at the university. Yeah, I have so many questions. So many questions. So back at the dig site, Karen has found yet another gold piece, and her and Steve are on the skids, because it turns out that Mr. Armstrong was not in Dr. Benton's cabin, but his own, and he was trying to make a pass at Karen. Apparently, she did not reciprocate this, and he got a little violent before the shots rang out. So, that's why he lied and said he was in Dr. Benton's cabin. So after finding the articles, Mrs. Fletcher gathers everyone into the main camp. And basically, she goes to Mr. Armstrong before she tells everybody to meet her in the main mess hall. Mr. Armstrong is wanting desperately to call and buy the land and says, I want it. Just let me have it. And she says, Mr. Armstrong, I don't think you should do that. There's something you should know. And he says, I don't let my wife in on my business dealings, and I certainly am not going to let you on. I don't take her advice, and I'm not going to take yours. And then Mrs. Fletcher has her epiphany and says, I need everybody in the mess hall right now. I have something to tell you all. She gathers everybody into the mess tent, and she lays out our crime for us. She says the land is fake. All the things that they have dug up over the years the 2 months they've been there is property from the university. She even shows Dr. Benton one of the artifacts they found, and he says, has this been tagged? And she says, oh yes, it's been tagged by the University of Utah. And Raymond Two Crows was an imposter. He wasn't actually Native American. He was to steal the artifacts from the museum, or from the university, and the person, and then she plays the chanting tape and says it really wasn't a real person, a real Native American person chanting up there. She basically says that it was reverse psychology. The more that they opposed Mr. Armstrong of buying the land, the more he would want to. But someone already bought the land. Mrs. Armstrong bought the land, and Dr. Garfield is in on it. It turns out that Mrs. Armstrong is our killer and mastermind. She basically killed Mr. Raymond because he got greedy and wanted more money and was going to tell her husband everything. So she killed him with one of the artifacts. And he drowned in the water after she killed him. Dr. Garfield, who was in on it and brought all the artifacts to the site, and I guess dug them so the people would find them. So many questions. And was in on it, and he said, I didn't murder him and I'm not going down for it. And what was her motivation, folks? Why did she do all this? Well, because he won't pay attention to her. And she wanted out of their marriage. I'm sure there are simpler ways to do that. Like divorce or something. I mean, seriously? What? And then, if you cared, Karen and Steve, although they were first at each other's throats, now they're lovers again. And Seth and Jessica make a promise to each other never to do a dig again. And the day was saved thanks to Jessica Fletcher. The end! Okay, I have so many questions. Like, they've been there for 2 months. What was this woman's end game? If she didn't have to kill Raymond Two Crows, Like, what was her plan? When he bought the land, was she going to be like, surprise, haha, it's not real? I mean, what exactly was her overall plan? Also, we're supposed to believe that Dr. Garfield went up there and, like, dug all this stuff there for them to find later, made sure to get people who had never dug before and couldn't tell if something was in the ground for several years or it was just put there. I mean, my God, this episode was not good. They all cannot be good, but Jessica saves it with her humor, and so does Seth. Alright, let's go over our guest stars. Like I said, there wasn't a lot. Celie Cullen played Karen. Let's see what she's known for. She looked familiar, so she might have been in another Murder, She Wrote episode. She's known for Who's That Girl, Star Trek Voyager, Let's Get Harry, and the TV show Hunter. Her last known credit is ER. I love that show. She was in 30-something, Star Trek Voyager, The Family Man, Hunter, Knots Landing, the original, Hill Street Blues. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She was only in 26 different things. Mostly television. Maybe I saw her in ER. I've seen lots of episodes of that. George Gizzard played Dr. Aubrey Benton. He looks so familiar to me, and I think I know why. He died in 2007 at the age of 79. He's known for Flags of Our Fathers, Bachelor Party, Advise and Consent, and The Addams Chronicles. His last known credit is Haskett's Chance, a TV movie in 2006. He guest starred in multiple episodes, or had a recurring role of Arthur Gold on Law and Order. Maybe that's where I know him from. He guest starred on Touched by an Angel, Third Rock from the Sun. He was in the miniseries Scarlet. The Golden Girls! He played George in that weird episode where George comes back from the dead, but it's only a dream that Blanche had. That's why he looked familiar to me. Oh, and he will appear in 2 other episodes of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of his credits then. So, cool. Then we had David Goff. David Goff, who played Garfield, our co-conspirator in this whole scheme. He died in 2008 at the age of 68. He's known for 2 Minute Warning, Black Scorpion, VIP, and the original Law and Order. His last known credit is Jelly. I don't know. He was in the show Girlfriends, Jane Doe, The Harder They Fall with Leah Thompson. He had guest starred several times on the original Law and Order. VIP was a TV series. I never heard of that. Walker, Texas Ranger, The X-Files, Jag, Baywatch, Melrose Place. Funny, I don't remember him on there. And he'll appear in a couple other episodes of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of his things, but I think he played Rhoda's husband in Rhoda. Let me see, because he looked familiar. Oh, General Hospital. Yeah, he was Joe, Rhoda's husband. I knew he looked familiar to me. But we'll go over more of his credentials when he appears in those other 2 episodes. And then Randolph Mantooth played Raymond Two Crows. He is still alive. He's known for Emergency. He was a quiet man, loving soap opera, and bold native. His last known credit is some short called Truth and Everything Else. He guest starred on Sons of Anarchy, Ghost Whisperer, One Life to Live, Criminal Minds. As the World Turns, he was in a lot of soap operas. ER, Diagnosis Murder, Walker, Texas Ranger, Jag, Loving, General Hospital, Baywatch, LA Law, and this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He was on the original Dallas, Fantasy Island, Charlie's Angels, Detective School, Operation Petticoat, Emergency, Love Boat, Emergency +4. Adam 12, Marcus Welby MD, McCloud, Night Gallery. He's been in 67 different things. Good for him. Steve was played by Stephen Shortridge. He is still alive. He is known for Say Anything, Matt Houston, The Bold and Beautiful, and Welcome Back, Kotter. He didn't look familiar to me because I have not seen that show all the way through. He was on The Bold and Beautiful when it first started in 1997 as Dave Reed. He guest starred in St. Elsewhere, Airwolf, Hunter, Hardcastle and McCormick, The Love Boat, Fantasy Island, The Greatest American Hero, Bosom Buddies, Aloha, Paradise, Original Charlie's Angels, Welcome Back, Kotter. And this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. What a shame. Because he didn't get much to do in this episode. Then we have Connie Stevens as Cynthia Armstrong, our killer. She is still alive, and she is known for Hawaii Eye, Grease 2, A Healing, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart. She's still acting, and her last known credit is by The Rivers of Babylon in 2019. She guest starred on 8 Simple Rules, Wild Card, that was a good show. Baywatch, Ellen, and she will appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote in 1990. So we'll go over more of her credits then. And last and certainly not least, the wonderful Robert Vernon, who played Gideon Armstrong. Hopefully he appears in another episode of Murder, She Wrote, because he didn't get much to do in this episode, and he's such a great actor. He died, unfortunately, in 2016 at the age of 83. He was known for The Magnificent Seven, Bullet, The Towering Inferno, and Superman 3. Love The Towering Inferno, one of my all-time favorite movies ever. He was in 231 different things. He guest starred on Law & Order Special Victims Unit. His last known credit is Gold Star. I never heard of it. He was in the TV series Hustle. Did some voiceover work for Recess, Taking the 5th Grade. Was in the TV series based on The Magnificent Seven, the original Law & Order. Was in The Nanny. Diagnosis Murder. Walker, Texas Ranger, As the World Turns. Danger Theater. And he will appear in several other episodes of Murder, She Wrote. So we'll go over more of his credentials then, and hopefully it'll be more. He'll get to do more in this episode than he got to do in this one. Overall, guys, pretty much if there's an episode like this, Jessica manages to save it every time. And I do believe that this is the last episode that aired in 1985. Yep, so 1985 was a wonderful year. And I can't wait to see you guys in the next one. Thank you all for your support. Thank you for the new 3 or 4 subscribers I got. Whether you're here for the Murder, She Wrote podcast or for Into the Woods, thank you. I appreciate the likes, the comments, the shares, the reactions and everything. Your support means the world to me, and I'm in this for the long haul. Can't wait to see you in the next episode, which is Murder by Appointment Only. And I love that one. Happy crime solving. Have a great day or night, depending on whenever you listen to this.